which my dad was a charter member.
Good evening, honored guests and ladies and gentlemen. I'm Carla, president of the Rotary Club of Montague. I'm here to introduce our speaker, the Honorable Wade MacLauchlan, who, as you know, is the Premier of our province, the 32nd Premier of Prince Edward Island. Before becoming Premier, Wade MacLauchlan was a member of the Order of Canada and a member of the Order of Prince Edward Island, and the first person to become a member of the Order of Canada prior to becoming a provincial premier. At this point, we all know him in this role, but I think it's important to highlight some of his major accomplishments along the way. For me, coming from Eastern PEI, the fact that he co-chaired the first Georgetown Conference on redefining rural in 2013 is impressive. I believe that that conference was a key to reinvigorating the spirit and life in my area of the island. Another significant contribution of Premier MacLauchlan was that he chaired the Palmer Conference on Public Sector Leadership in 2012 on the topic of Canada as a leader in immigration policy and practice. I've been wondering if the recognition the province is now receiving in the area of immigration had some of its origins there. Like many of us in this room who've gained experience and recognition along the way, Premier Wade MacLauchlan is not focused on previous accomplishments. His focus is on the future. According to the info I received from the Premier's office, that's what he wants to talk to us about today. So I'm going to quote what they sent to me. Since 2015, Premier Wade MacLauchlan has championed positive change and set a new course for Prince Edward Island. He's identified a number of key priorities, such as fostering economic growth and job opportunities, protecting our environment, investing in frontline services, and bringing a responsible approach to the province's finances. The province is leading the region and the country in many key indicators. Prince Edward Island's economy is growing faster than that of the region and the Canadian economy, meaning that islanders are better off than they were, and our businesses are growing. There are 2,700 additional jobs over the last year, and for the first time, Prince Edward Island's population exceeded 152,000. Prince Edward Island has seen transformative change under the Premier's leadership through the undertaking of some sizable initiatives, including the development of the Water Act, the Municipal Government Act, as well as investments in strategic infrastructure, such as the electric transmission cables, water and wastewater upgrades, and investments in healthcare and education to strengthen island communities. The Premier introduced the first balanced budget in a decade, targeting more investments in key areas like health, education, and children and families. He has introduced a generic drug program, increased support for vulnerable children, and provided significant investments in family and human services to ensure all islanders have an opportunity to prosper. That's the end of my quote, and my final statement is that I personally applaud Premier MacLauchlan on having identified poverty reduction strategies as a particular area needing development that we are working on here. Premier MacLauchlan.
Thank you, Carla. Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. Kwe. Chair Joanne, Your Honor, District Governor Don, and other head table guests, Rotary members and guests, great representation here in the room tonight for this annual event, and I'm pleased to be joined by 10 of my colleagues from the legislature. I know there are many people with us who are new in the involvement with Rotary or Prince Edward Island connected with new undertakings, and it's very much in the spirit, and it was evident in the room when we were mixing before dinner that there's a lot going on. That there's a lot going on in this room. There's a lot of talent, enterprise, friendship, sense of community, and commitments to do well and to continue doing better. And it's in that spirit that we gather and that we have this annual opportunity to review how we're doing as a province. And of course, that always includes recognizing where there are particular opportunities and challenges to do better. So first, let me thank the collected Rotary clubs of our province and the members for this annual event, for taking up this initiative, which has now been in place for a number of years. It's a great service to our province and an opportunity to consider where we are together. This evening, I will focus on 5 key themes. They'll be integrated. One, as Carla said, as others have noted, our economy is growing, outpacing the Atlantic region and in key areas, the nation. 2, our economy and indeed our province and communities are both diversified and integrated. And I believe this is a key to our overall and continuing success. We will see in the course of this evening that this growth and this sustainable growth is occurring throughout our province. 4, it's producing and it is evolving and growing in a way that is giving benefits and opportunities for people. The point about people will be key. And 5th, the importance of telling our story, to speak to each other, to engage and know what others are doing, and indeed to be aware of what's taking place throughout our province. And I believe that these 5 pieces together flow directly from the opportunity to be together here this evening, and I can say that in conversations I've had with people throughout the room, here and on other occasions, I'm convinced that this gathering and the people who are taking it in by Eastlink or by other media would agree with us. In some ways, I say to myself, maybe I should just leave my speech and go around the room and ask each person here to tell us what you're doing, because that's in a sense what's represented here tonight. But we don't kind of have the time for that, so I'll start by telling a story. And let me refer first to this quote that you'll see on the screen. Prince Edward Island is on a tear economically, leading the region. This is from Fred Bergman of the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council. And it's always good to get a third-party endorsement, and one that could even have a double entendre, in the sense that there are a lot of people in the room, I'm sure, might think of something else when they hear that someone is on a tear. And I'm not even sure that when Fred Bergman said that he was aware that we had discovered the powers of kombucha, with cannabis soon to follow. But in any event, we are on a tear, and when Bergman says it, he means in the sense that our economy is doing well, and doing well sustainably. I might even pull up the next slide, and as we're transitioning to that slide, I'm going to refer to a conversation that I had on Friday evening with Francis Morrissey. Francis is the head of Royal Star Food in Tignish, and we were speaking by telephone, and he said to me, "Wade, Prince Edward Islanders need to understand more fully how well things are going in this province. And Francis told me about going from Tignish to earlier last week in one day for meetings in Surrey, then Montague, and in Charlottetown before going back to Tignish. That's a lot of ground to cover. And Francis is a pretty good observer of what he sees along the way. And he said, you know, you can look in at Keenan's in Rolla Bay, and you can go on Main Street in Montague, and come back through Mount Albion and see what's going on at Vanco Farms, both potatoes and tulips, and the activity in Charlottetown. You mentioned Pleasant Valley, where Kennedy Metals has got a sizable operation going. And what was neat about it is Francis was, keeping moving, obviously, on a day that involved so much travel. He was observing the number of vehicles in the parking lot as an indicator of the number of people working in these establishments. And he further made reference to coming by Slemon Park and the activity there, and Elmsdale and what was going on at Griffin's. And, of course, getting back to Tignish, where everybody is prospering. And that point about getting around, seeing what's going on, understanding what's behind it is a very important part of what we get the chance to talk about and appreciate here this evening. And indeed, when Francis gets back to Royal Star, there are more than 400 people working there when the operation is at its peak. And many people might not think of lobster shipping or a seafood processing operation being at its peak in the first week of February, but this week they will ship 250,000 pounds of lobster from Prince Edward Island that will go to airports in Halifax, Montreal, and Toronto to be flown overseas. So there's an indication and the kind of thing that we can find out by getting around and talking to each other. I told Francis in that phone call about having been at St. Peter's Bay earlier on Friday and having had the opportunity, as did my colleagues, to see the amount of business and the activity and the community pride and the prosperity, sustainable prosperity, that is evident in a former consolidated elementary school with on the order of 30 employees in various businesses, with enough activity through rent paying by those businesses to continue to support that facility, including the public services that are offered there. And you can see between Charlottetown and St. Peter's a lot of that same evidence of activity and sustainable activity in our province. And this is really a story about place and people. So let me point out to you then the document that's at each of your places, the Prince Edward Island Economy on a Tear, and I'll refer to a number of indicators of how it is that we are indeed doing well by comparative measure over time in our province and by comparison with other provinces. The first slide refers to our economic growth over a 5-year period, where Prince Edward Island's growth from 2012 to the end of 2017 is virtually even with that of Canada as a whole, and indeed well ahead of the prosperity or the growth that was seen in the other provinces here in our region. And the point of this is not to do better than the other provinces, it's to really see how we're doing and to understand how we can make it continue. In the next slide, you will see a reference to our population growth, where in fact in 2016-17, Prince Edward Island led the country with year-over-year growth of 1.7%. And as Carla mentioned, our highest ever population. And to me, the point that comes along with that growth is perhaps the greatest achievement. That is, in 2016-17, we got younger for the first time since 1968. Yay. Whoops. That is a big achievement for our province, to have more young people relative to the total population than we've had in 50 years. And they're here in the room tonight, and they're all over our province, and that's something that we can celebrate. And it's not because there's anything wrong with any of us, whatever age we are, but if we're looking at the total shape of our population, this is something that every place in the world is trying to achieve. And in fact, there were only 3 provinces in Canada last year that did it, the other 2 being Manitoba and Ontario. And in fact, we doubled the rate at which they lowered their median age. The next piece is to look at growth in employment. And Carla referred to 2,700 new jobs. In fact, there were 4,100 new full-time jobs. That's to say, we created 2,700 new jobs and converted a number of part-time jobs to full-time. That's a phenomenal rate of growth. And indeed, when you see what that represents relative to our population and our workforce, it's a very fast pace, and it's one that we would do well to sustain, and that's partly what we'll talk about in the course of the evening. The final piece that is in the take-home is labour income, and this is something that is really important to understand when we talk about how our economy is doing. Prince Edward Island, more than any other province, does a good job of sharing wealth when it's created. We have the least difference between those who do really well and those who are struggling compared to any other province. And we also have, and we can be proud of this, the highest minimum wage in Atlantic Canada, one that we've continued to increase over time. And when we see how these numbers mount in terms of income for workers or those who earn their income, it's an indication that when we have growth, it gets spread around. So let me, having introduced those 4 slides, turn to what I might think of as the ingredients, or why it is that we have this growth, why it I sometimes say, what is the combination that works for Prince Edward Island? One of them is that we have a diversified economy. And that's a valuable asset. And indeed, we created between 200 and 300 new companies in the past year. We also have an economy that's integrated. We have a province that's integrated. When one can leave Tignish at the furthest northwest point in the province and travel to the most easterly points and be home at night, you have to keep moving, but that says something about the extent to which we know each other, we work together. If an opportunity comes up, people can find partnerships with people that they already know. It's evident in this room tonight to have the Rotary Clubs of Prince Edward Island come together, to have people sitting together who may not have seen each other for a while, but every one of us will leave here tonight knowing something more about other community efforts, other opportunities, other people. And that point about knowing each other is a very critical and an integral part to the success that we've seen and that we will continue to see. Finally, we have a sense of community, of communities throughout the province, and of a community that we're building together, and a province and a future that we're building together. So let me take an example, and I'll continue to work with that of lobster. In 2 years, we've seen more than 50% increase in the value of lobster landings. So that would translate in dollar terms to more than $230 million in 2017, approaching $250 million. And when we look at where that wealth, the landings, appears throughout our province, we start to get, I start to do the cradle, we start to get an idea of how wealth is distributed, or how resources get exchanged, and how prosperity grows in our province. So this map shows, not surprisingly, that those lobsters are landed in a lot of communities throughout our province and in all parts of our province. And in addition to the value at the wharf, we have investments in new capacity or in new ability to be productive. And indeed, over the past same 2 years, we've had more than an 80% increase in the holding capacity for lobsters. We now have a capacity to hold more than 1 million pounds of lobster at a time. And when you think about that shipment that's leaving Royal Star this week, it wasn't caught yesterday. So that enables us through the year and at the right time and place and dealing with the right customers who'll pay us a premium price to be sure that we've got the demand as high as possible and at the right time. So what we see in the lobster fishery, and we can find it in other sectors, we're now showing on this slide new investments in cold storage capacity throughout our province. And in the last 2 years, we've added 14 million pounds of new cold storage capacity. Some of that's in the fishery, some of it is in agriculture, some of it is in other areas. But when you look at where that is and where it is located throughout our province, and in terms of the dollar value of that investment in cold storage capacity, that's upward of $10 million, $10.5 million. We could put a further image up there for warehouses throughout the province. I can think of one in particular that's a $20 million investment in equipment, in processing gear, much of it that is produced here in Prince Edward Island. And what we see is in our main sectors, there is a practice and a tendency and a culture to reinvest, to invest in vehicles. Prince Edward Island led the country in vehicle sales last year. So we see that throughout these sectors, and there is not only a culture to invest, but to innovate, to find new ways to do things, to enhance the value to the customer of what we're producing, and in particular that's true in food. I like to tell our National Minister of Innovation, the Honourable Navdeep Bains, about innovation. There are various panels and committees and so on that look into innovation across Canada, and I say if you come and see what the people in the primary sectors are doing, or the people that are working closest to the action or working directly with customers, you'll see that they're being innovative and they're cooperating with each other and producing new value on a regular basis. And I know that's represented here in this room. We could go to other sectors, but the point is that we've got sustainable growth. We know who our customers are. Our products are respected and sought here at home and around the world. And we've got an expectation that will continue. I'm going to switch from this story about the productive sector to what we've been able to do in the public sector in terms of strategic investments. Over the 3 years that include the current season, we will see $90 million in investments in 19 island communities in water and wastewater. That's the kind of thing that a community does or that a province can do when it's doing well, and that work will be done for another 40 or 50 years in the communities where it's taking place. So it's really producing and providing a foundation for continued growth and prosperity. We've completed, and they're now electrified, the transmission cables between Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick. That's a once-in-50 years project. We've almost tripled our capacity to transmit power. It's our biggest construction project since the Confederation Bridge, and it's done on sound economic terms. We've had an opportunity in roads and bridges to make exceptional investments. with a federal government partner through infrastructure programs, with $42 million being expended in this one construction season in the 2018-19. These are big things, and we're doing them in a way that's sensitive to the environmental challenges that we face, to the opportunities that come with a province that has an integrated economy, and at a time when we can make these investments, when the province can make these investments and still see its debt to gross domestic to GDP ratio decline. This slide is an opportunity to see the investments that we've made over a few decades in energy production. Wind turbines, where we lead the world after Denmark in terms of the amount of our energy that is produced from wind. We have more than 100 projects where we're producing energy from biomass, which is a great opportunity to keep resources local, to use resources that are available to us and that are more environmentally friendly than if we were burning carbon, and where it's an opportunity for us to continue to be more autonomous or self-sufficient in terms of our energy and our environmental responsibility. And all islanders should be proud of that combination and what it opens up for us. It also is a time when we can invest and are investing in long-term resources. One of the things we know is very much needed throughout our province is more effective internet, and we have a project underway that will see a backbone fiber that will enable, on a competitive basis, effective high-speed internet in all parts of our province, and that will translate into many opportunities that we can't even foresee as we are gathered here in this room tonight, because that will be the opportunity for people to take their own initiative, to seize opportunities, to live more in more communities throughout the province, to have a quality of life, and indeed to make us even more successful and competitive in global terms. We've been investing in social infrastructure and intend for that to continue, because you can do that when you're in a stronger fiscal position or when the economy is doing well. In our current budget and the projection for the next 5 years, we have significant and again generational investments in health facilities. 2 manors underway now, Tyne Valley and Montague. The biggest investment over the next 5 years is the replacement of our mental health hospital with a new forward-looking campus approach to deal with mental health, to invest in schools and in new childcare spaces, and on the operating side, to make commitments in terms of health, the biggest additional investment that's been made in more than a decade. It's always a challenge still for it to go far enough, but when we're making those investments, to think about how we can, I say, get further upstream, or to deal with health issues in a way that we're taking more of a primary care or a preventative approach, and you can see that in what we've done over the past 12 months in mental health, and to approach various areas in the health field so that we're working more on the wellness part of our mandate, and that's always a challenge, but it's a time to make those investments and to make those priorities and to work with islanders to have the programs and the policies and the collaboration that's going to best address our needs in health, in education, and in social programs. And let me persist on that point about collaboration and community. Most of the work that we're doing in the effective way, or in the most effective way, is based on engagement, partnership with community, and respect for the role of community organizations. And I know that's exactly how Rotary internationally, and certainly here in Prince Edward Island, if we go back to Don's opening remarks, when you look at the ways that Rotary works with other community organizations, with people who are on the ground, who know the field, who have the right resources and the right connections to get things done. And here in the room tonight, we have represented people from our Youth Futures Council, for example. It's been a very effective group to tie up with in terms of understanding the priorities and working with the right people to move forward, and sometimes move forward in new ways. Excuse me. We have, pardon me, we have people who are members of our recently named Poverty Reduction Advisory Council, and we thank them for that work, and Carla, I certainly agree on the importance of that and how it ties in with the overall work that needs to be done in our province. There are people here who are members of our recently established Regional Economic Advisory Councils, of which there are 4, drawing on the uniqueness and then the integration of the different parts of our province and our economy. And one of the things that we tend, I want to point or persist on this point about the social programs. Because we sometimes talk about social programs as if they're in a world apart from the economy. Well, it's not the case at all. In fact, there's a very tight integration and a mutual relationship and benefit from a prosperous economy, and in the first part, the ability to invest in social programs, and then what those programs do in terms of our overall well-being. And let me point out that over the past 2 years, and in the year that we're going into, we have seen new social programs and transfers and investments that would surpass $40 million going directly into the hands or the homes of islanders who need them. The federal government commitment to the enhanced child care benefit means $25 million additional in Prince Edward Island families' budgets. That's a lot of money in terms of the economy, but more to the point, resources that will enable those families to do well, to have their priorities, to not be worried about the things that they might have otherwise be worried about. In the case of our provincial policies, we've made provincial income tax changes that amount to a net $7.1 million, the great majority of it for people in need, including almost 3,000 who no longer are on the income tax paying rolls at all. But that money is now in people's hands and pockets and budgets, and again in communities. We have the generic drug program that Carla mentioned. That's $2 million. $2 million out of the government coffers, but it's even more than that in terms of the ability of people to fill prescriptions, to be well, to look after their health, and to not have the worry that they would otherwise have, because that program is aimed at people who don't otherwise have pharmaceutical or drug insurance. We can see this in our home renovation programs, in our food allowance rates, which have increased by $1.5 million a year. So as you go through and you add up these different items, I'll mention one more. We brought in a new program that allows more post-secondary students to receive employment insurance benefits while attending post-secondary education. And in terms of additional dollars, this year alone, that is at least $4 million, and it might even be 6. That's for those students to provide for them, and you can be sure it's going into circulation, and it helps to provide them with the resources they need to get a post-secondary education. This all amounts to a very significant factor in how we're doing in our province. And as we're going around, because people do this, they go around, they say, so help me to understand why this all seems to be going so well. Let's never forget the importance of putting resources into the hands and the pockets and the budgets of people who'll spend it. Let me move on, and I'm going to stop and take a look at my watch. We'll go quickly. This is the whole cultural side of things. We've seen growth in tourism. 4 consecutive very positive years. And it's interesting to see how this is spreading further throughout the province. So we took a look at the 30 top-rated restaurants on TripAdvisor. And the culinary piece is a very important explanation of why we're seeing growth in tourism. And then people get to go to more places. We've got growth in wineries, breweries, and distilleries throughout the province. We've got growth. You see, this shows where the small halls are. And altogether, what we can see here is the role that culture and cultural production or creativity play in our ability to do well as a province. We have dozens, more than dozens, of islanders who perform all over the world. And they're on stages tonight in Regina and Berlin and Australia and the internet. Every one of them is selling their shows and their recordings and their performances and their cultural activity on the internet. So it's a very significant part of what is, you might say, the unseen economy of culture. And it's something that we capture in a cultural action plan over the next 5 years. And we tend to see or hear first the music, which is formidable, but it's in film, it's in theater, it's in writing. And in case any of us needs an example to really prove the case, think of what L.M. Montgomery created for this province through her creative work. We'll take a look then at some of the ways in which we're going to have some further employment opportunities. If we can just pull up a further slide here. So on this slide, we're going to see our large employers, and some of these are very large in terms of numbers. These are the goods-producing sector mainly, and indeed, if we showed the service sector and the ways in which we're growing in a lot of diverse and in many cases smaller operations of up to 25 employees or around 50 employees, we'd have a lot more pieces on this slide. I can tell you about some traveling I've done in my own constituency in the recent past, and you can go to long-established businesses like Allen Manufacturing that's now growing. It's got 20 employees and shipping all over the world, and certainly in a time of growth. You can go to the Dunes. I asked Peter Janssens how many people he's got working for him at its peak. He said the mid-50s. You start thinking about what that means. You go to Richard's Fish and Chips and ask them how many people are working there. 15. You can go to the Canadian Goat Soap Company, which isn't far from my place, and it's a family of 6. They're all working right down to the youngest, and they've got some other employees. So that's the kind of realities that we have and that we can appreciate kind of throughout our province. We've had this year alone 120 new jobs in the whole bioscience sector. We've seen growth in aerospace, and indeed there's a new owner at Standard Aero, the new owner at Vector, where they're intending to grow and already are in that process. Construction, 2017, we had our biggest year ever, and I'm very confident that it'll be bigger in 2018. This is one of the firms in the bioscience, a relatively new firm at Somru Bioscience. And when you're adding 4,100 full-time jobs in 12 months, you know there's something going on. So let me come to the question of where some of the strains are, or where there's an opportunity to be sure that we continue to grow and continue to be on a tear. One of them is in workforce. There are many opportunities. There are jobs today. We see construction. We see in some of the highly skilled areas. We know it's true in the service areas. And we project that that is going to continue to be the case over the foreseeable future. We have 2,000 people a year in Prince Edward Island turning 65, and that doesn't mean they stop work, but it does indicate that there's going to be an opportunity for replacement or for transitions for new people. We've seen growth in key sectors at a phenomenal rate. So we have to be sure that we're encouraging our own people to be able to have the skills, and it's great that UPEI and Holland College are represented here tonight. We have to be sure that we continue with the success that we've seen, and it's certainly evident in this room, in immigration or in people moving to Prince Edward Island, whether they're coming from far away or coming back home or coming from nearby, and it's really remarkable. And I know there's a story of new people contributing to our province represented at each table in this room tonight, and that should and must continue. One of the ways in which we can be sure that we're attending to this or making sure that we will have the workforce of the future is to tell each other, and in particular to tell our young people that there are opportunities, that they can do things, that they can get educated, that there are many different ways to have a future here. There are some brilliant programs, and there are people in the room tonight who are part of it, who are working with young people who have been, you might say, disengaged, or who've had a hard time, or who haven't been sort of on a track of success. One of them, a program that I love, is the Seam Star program, where the two different programs were on the order of 50 young people who were really down and out are now proud, engaged, moving forward with their lives. We've got the Harvest program, and Roxanne Carter-Thompson of the Explorer Group is here, where a number of young people, again, who might otherwise not have kind of followed a very productive path, have been supported and given opportunities to find their own strengths, to become confident, to make good friends and good judgments, but most of all to become more independent. And the more of that we do, and I know it's at the core of what Rotary does, the further ahead we will be as a province. And we should never overlook the core challenge, not the core challenge, the core recipe is. It's been the recipe for a long time. It's for people to do better. And that can apply to anyone, but most importantly, to people who might be on the margins or disengaged or might not see how they can do better. And there's a lot of that going on in this province today, and I thank everybody who's part of it at each of the tables in this room. It's not insignificant. We have new people coming to our province for the first time. And I started out speaking about Royal Star and Francis Morrissey, and Francis has with him tonight Cece, who's come to PEI 4 years ago roughly, and has been working at Royal Star for 3.5 years, is on the track to become a Canadian citizen. She's already a landowner or a property owner, and is part of a very active workforce in that western end of the province, and you can find that same story at every point in our great province. And it's something that comes together with how we're all getting ahead. Housing is an area where we do need to be sure that we're acting together and acting in response to the demands, and that covers a range of areas, whether it's for seniors, for people looking for affordable housing, for students, for our expanding workforce, for people who are part of our expanding population. And we've created a housing supply task force, and the scenario or the projection that we can see is that 2018 will be a year when we see a very significant undertaking in various parts of the province to build multi-unit housing to respond to various needs, at the same time as there continues to be a fully active construction sector responding to single family or dual family housing. The third, so housing, workforce development, and I come back to telling our stories. And it's so important to get around, to see what's happening, to talk to people, to listen, to learn, to find opportunities together. And one of the things I've been doing for a couple of years, and that's what all these red dots are supposed to represent, is talking to islanders. There are people here at tables right in front of me that we've interviewed and then put on YouTube or Facebook posts, and they're attracting quite an audience because it's another way of telling each other our stories and being sure that we understand what's happening and happening in all parts of our province. Indeed, if there were two further red dots there, there would be one up on McLeod's Ledge to the off North Cape where we were tuna fishing in late August with Quebec Premier Philippe Couillard, and Neil Perry had us out. Is Neil here? And it was the next week, of course, that he caught a record-sized tuna, but that's no problem. We'll be back. And you could go to the very other end of the province, to Cape Bear or to Guernsey Cove, and find a very productive enterprise that produced these eyeglasses, or at least the frames that I'm wearing. And that's the way I encourage all of us to proceed as we go on into the next year, to listen, to learn, to engage with each other. And in telling our stories to each other, we will in turn be sure that the rest of the world understands that we are the mighty island, that we are doing well, and there's no reason why we can't continue to do well in all parts of Prince Edward Island with our diversified, integrated, and sustainable economy. I thank you very much for the opportunity to review this, to look forward to how we continue to do well as a province, as communities, and to recognize again the part, the very essential part that is played by friendship, collaboration, looking out for each other, working at the community level to do better, to find the ways that we can all enjoy, I'll call it upward mobility, and to recognize the part that the Rotary clubs in particular play in ensuring that we in Prince Edward Island have, along with prosperity, a very special place, a strong community, and people who do well. Thank you very much. Merci. Walalia.
Give a standing ovation. I'd like to call Emile Galantford, who's the president of the Rotary Club of Stratford.
Thank you. On behalf of all the presidents and also all the Rotary members, Premier MacLauchlan, we'd like to thank you for coming here and giving us this speech. I was just talking to some people before, like, we're such a small province.